Welcome to East Asia Pulse, a podcast series by the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. I'm Chen, and I'll be your host for today. Today we'll delve into the intricate dynamics of Southeast Asia-China relations in the context of global politics. Our distinguished guest is Professor Prof Cheng-Chwee, a renowned expert in international relations and Southeast Asian affairs. Professor Kuik is affiliated with the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies at the National University of Malaysia and holds non-resident fellowships at the Foreign Policy Institute, Johns Hopkins, and Carnegie, China. His research focuses on the external policies of small and secondary states, Asian security, and international relations. Notably, he has been recognized in Stanford University's top 2% scientists in the field of international relations for 2023 and 2024. Today, we explore the evolving geopolitical landscape and the strategic choices facing Southeast Asian nations in their relations with China, especially in light of recent global developments. So, Professor Kuik, could you start by giving us an overview of the current state of Southeast Asia-China relations and how they have evolved in recent years?
Thanks very much, Dr. Chen Gang, and also EAI for having me here. I thought that is a good question to kickstart our conversation in the sense that China-Southeast Asia relations clearly is a very dynamic and also, some would say, one of the most important relationship in contemporary world. And the importance or even uniqueness of this set of relationship between a big power and also a group of middle and so small states in Southeast Asia region is also one of the most important set of relationship. And its relationship can be unpacked economically, but also I think in terms of institutional building, right? Economic-wise, I think it's quite clear. There are so many indicators to show. Almost every day we read about news about the economic interactions and cooperation between the two sides. And by statistics, we know that Southeast Asia or ASEAN as a whole and China, they are the biggest trading partner of each other. There are also investment, there are also connectivity cooperation in many ways. So those are quite well known. I thought I would just highlight a number of other equally important but might be neglected. That's in terms of institutional building in the regional context. China-Southeast Asia relations is unique in part because of the institutional buildings. They serve as a catalyst for other sets of regional cooperation. For example, we knew that the ASEAN Plus 3 was established in 1997 when China, Japan, and South Korea collaborated with ASEAN countries to come together. But we know that after that, the dynamics between China and Southeast Asia has created a number of spillover and also catalytic effects. When China, for example, proposed ASEAN-China FTA in 2002, we saw that Japan, South Korea, and others also join and do something similar. In other non-economic aspect, in terms of the TAC, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, when China and India signed with the ASEAN, you saw other countries, big powers in and out, have also done something similar. So those are examples to show that this is not just a set of China-Southeast Asia relationship. It's not just a dynamic relationship in the sense that you saw lots of developments from every now and then, but it actually has an actual impact, both economically and also strategically.
Thank you. So in your seminar, you discussed this concept of hedging in Southeast Asian foreign policies. Could you explain what hedging means in this context and why it remains a significant strategy for these countries?
This is a big topic that we can perhaps use 3 days and 3 nights to elaborate since we don't have that time. And let me just use a simple language to contextualize the very important, and it's not just academic issue, also policy issue. Hedging can be simplified as a neutrality plus approach. Neutrality plus approach in the sense that when facing two or more competing big powers, competing giants. Smaller countries like those in Southeast Asia or ASEAN region, we try to hedge by pursuing the kind of neutrality plus. Neutrality means that not taking sides. And not taking sides is different from not taking positions. It's something that I think confused by others. So neutrality plus means that smaller countries are insisting of not taking sides between the competing giants, but plus means that they are trying to do that actively, inclusively, and adaptively. And this is very different from how many would describe neutrality as a passive and reactive. It's not. Hedging, it's always active, inclusive, and adaptive, in the sense that they are trying to undertake a number of very active statements or actions to underscore, ensure that they are not being interpreted as siding with one against the other. And they are doing this also inclusively, meaning that other than U.S. and China, they try to also have inclusive relationship with other next-tier powers like Japan, South Korea, Europe, so on and so forth. And adaptively in the sense that as things change, as things become more uncertain, they will try to adapt it by doing more and even a wider scope. An example would be after Trump tariff announcement, after Xi Jinping's visit to Southeast Asia. So those are indicators that leave the impression, and smaller countries are sensitive about that, because how big power will act and react affects smaller countries' survival. And because of that, they know that their policy cannot stay static. Yeah? It has to be more dynamic. How dynamic? As things become more uncertain, they know that neutrality plus, by insisting of active, inclusive, and adaptive, will allow them to hedge, to mitigate a lot of risks from top down that is beyond their control, but will affect them in one way or another, right? As economic relationship with U.S. affected, going to be reduced by all these tariff announcements. What survival-seeking countries are going to do? They are trying to diversify as much as possible. China is one factor. It's being one big partner. But clearly, you can see that the ASEAN countries are trying to hedge by not only a deepening relationship with China, they are trying to do something similar with virtually everyone. In Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea, we've mentioned that. With Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the more the merrier. European countries would clearly be key players as well. So hedging is neutrality plus in that particular sense. Countries would do that not because of hedging is perfect or is panacea, solve every problem. No such thing in the real life. Hedging has its own problems, but hedging is being adopted because it allows smaller countries to adapt and to be active in mitigate all these risks that will happen, but beyond their control, but will affect them in one way or another. As things change, they will adapt and do even more. There are many examples that we can use to elaborate this relationship.
So this is kind of a smart and dynamic hedging from Southeast Asian countries in response to major powers' foreign policies.
I would choose to use a different S word, not smart, but survival seeking. Yeah,
survival. Okay.
It's not smart in the sense that it's really not up to us, right? How economic risks will emerge, how strategic risks will emerge, how U.S. and China will act and interact between themselves is beyond our control, right? How many tariffs will be imposed, for example? What kind of technology will be restricted? Those things are not so desirable, they are undesirable. They will affect smaller countries' survival, economically, diplomatically, and strategically. But again, they are beyond our control, beyond small countries' control, but affect the survival space of all these countries. So I would say hedging is very pragmatic. Not necessarily smart, but it's for survival. Survival because of what else are you going to do? You cannot afford to put all eggs in any power's basket. Not US basket, not China's basket. So hedging means that you need to diversify as much as possible for our survival, for your survival.
In today's world, you have to be smart to survive.
That's certainly true. But it's certainly something that I think all policymakers and academics try to make sense and how to do something that allows us to enlarge the space that we can maneuver together with those who are also affected in one way or another.
You mentioned the erosion of the dual hierarchies in the Asian order. Could you elaborate on what these hierarchies are and how their transformation is impacting regional stability?
Yeah, this is a tough question, but also a very spot-on question, Dr. Chen-Kang, because for many of us who follow international relations, especially those in Asia, we know that over the last 1 or 2 decades, experts, scholars have been describing and using the notion of dual hierarchies to depict the kind of situations smaller countries in Asia are in the sense that they say that there is a security hierarchy led by United States. On the other hand, there is an economic hierarchy led by China. And then some Chinese friends translate it as 安全靠美国 经济靠中国. So the kind of like dual hierarchies. This is quite pertinent, but in a way also debatable. Not even at the height of these dual hierarchies, not all scholars would completely agree that that is accurate, but it does reflect the rough situations that lasted for perhaps 1 or more decades. But now, over the last few years, and let me emphasize that it is not all started by Trump or Trump 1.0 or Trump 2.0. Things are already evolving, but Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 does escalate or accelerate these changes in the sense that countries are adjusting both security-wise and also economically, so that in recent years, we are seeing as U.S. still play important role in terms of security, either regional security or bilateral security of some allies and partners. You see China has also made some progress in terms of enhancing the security relationship with the countries in the region, Southeast Asia in particular. And this manifests in many aspects, right? Non-traditional security cooperation is becoming more and more between China and Southeast Asia interactions. Even traditional, the military security-wise, you have been hearing and reading lots of developments in terms of how, for example, military exercises involving China and bilaterally with some individual ASEAN countries. And in recent years, we have also seen some trilateral or minilateral security military exercises involving China and Southeast Asia. And the most recent indicator of all is the so-called 2+2 mechanism. We know that China and Indonesia established the first 2+2 mechanism that involving Southeast Asian countries. That was last year. This year, it was Malaysia. When we talk about 2+2, it means that it is a ministerial level of a foreign ministry plus defense ministry. So this is something that Indo-Pacific powers have been doing. But China is also doing something similar. Those are among the examples and indicators to show that even those U.S. is still playing a dominant role when it comes to security cooperation in regional order. China has also played some catch-up and making some progress in terms of promoting security cooperation with countries in ASEAN region, bilaterally, minilaterally, and regionally. So those are the security aspect. Economic aspect, China's economic role has always been important. But we also know that when it comes to high-tech, U.S. has always been the dominant and leading partner in many ways, semiconductor and digital cooperation. And let's not forget that, in fact, on ground, in reality, it is not just U.S. and China. Other countries, European countries, for example, clearly are important players, economic partners for countries in Southeast Asia. Let's take 5G, telecommunication as an example. Ericsson is the choice of partner for many countries in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So I think the kind of like a very neat notion of dual hierarchies might not necessarily be reflecting what is really going on. With Trump 2.0 uncertainties, this trend, I think, are going to be eroded even further.
With the increasing economic ties between Southeast Asia and China, do you see any potential risks or challenges that these countries might face in the long term?
Yeah, this is a multi-million policy question, I would say. I believe all governments in the region, smaller countries in the ASEAN region especially, have been very concerned because while almost everyone is concerned about the tariff impact from U.S., from Trump 2.0 administration, many are also worrying about the spillover extended processes, right? Because of the expected more flooding of Chinese goods into the region. Supply over capacity will be among the key concerns. There are clearly key concerns for governments in Thailand, in Malaysia, in many other countries. And we are also worried about during these negotiation processes. Some are concerned that we are seeing not just about decoupling, between U.S. and China. Some are also seeing double decoupling in the sense that during the negotiation process, would they and to what extent the pressure of decouple from China will also be coming in one form or another. So I think the risks, the uncertainties, the challenges are multiple. It's not just from one power, but from, I think, power, action, and reaction. So those will continue, and then again, this is where I think the pragmatic hedging or pragmatic neutrality plus will come in. Countries cannot speculate how all these risks will evolve, which risks, there are multiple risks, and which risks will evolve greater than the others. So hedging is a speculation avoidance. You cannot afford to speculate, so you avoid the speculation by try to be as active, as inclusive, and as adaptive as possible. Countries are adjusting and try to preempt and also try to mitigate as much as possible by doing what we call as plus or plus plus, as we described. For example, you could see that when it comes to, say, AI technology, can be a sensitive issue these days because of Washington does warn countries not to use Huawei or China-related AI technology. But you are seeing countries are adjusting by selectively responding to all those pressure from the big powers. And what they are doing in common is that they diversify as much as possible. Countries say that even when we are relying on the West, we also want to diversify with the East. Those trends will continue. And there are indicators of countries are trying to pursue the neutrality plus. It's not so efficient. You are going to cost more money. You are going to maybe take more time. But when big power pressure are growing, uncertainty are growing, what other choice do you have other than doing the plus plus? I think the trend will continue.
Since you are talking about the trend, I think my last question is about the future trends. What kind of future trends do you foresee in Southeast Asia-China relations? And how should policymakers in the region prepare for these changes?
I would say that to better understand or address this question, I know your question is primarily about China, Southeast Asia, but from smaller countries' perspective, clearly Southeast Asia-China relations, it's a part of the larger issue of the alignment position issue. China is very important, getting more important. But for survival reason, countries naturally would also want to leverage on the relationship with many other powers and countries as well. And we are already in a very fragmented, with the growing uncertainty, we are going to go through what we call as the global fragmentation era. And the global fragmentation era, economically and strategically, means that countries are trying to realign in one way or another. Realign doesn't mean that we are moving from one power against the other. But the current ongoing global realignment processes, we are going to see a very messy, very loose, multi-layered arrangement. So the trend, the future of China, Southeast Asia must be understood from this pragmatic adjustment. We are accepting that the world in the next few years or few decades is going to be very, very pragmatic. And how do you handle that? You will try to leverage on this situation by cultivate as many layers of partnership as possible. So in that sense, as countries continue to enhance cooperation with China, they would continue to also create a lot of kind of mechanism that can complement. Yeah? One good example would be what we have read from news the last few days. When ASEAN meetings are ongoing, there is a new mechanism called as ASEAN GCC China. So this is one good example to show that ASEAN mechanism is unique in the sense that as things become more uncertain, countries, for survival reason, they will try to be adaptive and active by continuing mechanisms that have been working so far, but at the same time create new mechanisms. ASEAN GCC, ASEAN Gulf Cooperative Council and China, ASEAN GCC China, is one latest example to show that as new challenges are emerging, countries are also creating a new mechanism to tackle that together. So China-Southeast Asia relationship is not just between Southeast Asia and China. Today, I think other actors are going to be come into play together. It fit into, again, what we mentioned earlier on, the more the merrier. Whether or not ASEAN GCC China in the coming years or decades will become ASEAN GCC +3 or +6 or even +8 remain to be seen. But I'm quite optimistic we are going to see the direction moving into that future where multi-layered arrangement is the way to go as global fragmentation deepens and widens.
With that optimistic note, I'd like to thank you, Professor Kuik, for joining us. Once again, I'm Chen Gang, and you have been listening to East Asia Pulse. To learn more about our work and stay connected, you can subscribe to our mailing list on our website or follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Thanks for listening to us. Goodbye.